No matter who you are, where you live, or what kind of personality you have experienced what it feels like to be in an argument. I'm quite the peacemaker now, but growing up, that wasn't true. If I was in an argument, I would argue and argue and argue until my point was made, or the other person was just so exhausted, they didn't care anymore. I would not let it go. And when the exhaustion technique wasn't working, I had a secret weapon called sarcasm. I was like a master wordsmith when it came to sarcasm. No matter what someone said, I had a particular set of sarcastic skills and I knew exactly what to say to put them in their place. When it comes to arguing, we all have a go-to style. Maybe your go-to move is to always be louder than the other. Maybe you go passive-aggressive and you make a snide comment that appears to be harmless, but you know it will make a deep cut. Maybe you're just plain aggressive. You flip a table and go on with your life. Maybe you just go silent and you retreat into your head or hide in your room. Everyone has a way in which they fight. In the same way, nearly everybody has something that they want to fight for, a subject that gets you ready to throw down. For example, school should be year-round, or Snapchat is actually better than TikTok, or dare I mention something about politics. You see, we all have subjects that we care about and triggering conversations that make us want to scream. Everybody has an opinion, and sometimes those opinions bring out the fight in us. But we all know our arguments and fights don't stay contained to harmless, less personal topics like calling shotgun or controlling the TV in the living room. Our worlds are full of arguments and the options are endless. Wanting more freedom with parents leads to arguments. Who has to actually do the work in the group project? Or even more serious stuff like who will win the election? Who will win the election? Who should win the election? What people should do about gun rights, or immigration, or women's rights, or just about anything. For most of you, tension and arguments bother you. In fact, they're pretty annoying. You have enough to worry about in life without an argument. When the world around you is in such constant conflict, most people tend to do one thing or the other. They go straight to anger. They feel torn. You don't really know which side to take. You could care less. You just are here to watch the fight go down. When we really get involved in an argument, we all just want one thing, and that one thing is to win. That's our ultimate goal. And we'll have a few tactics and we've practiced to help us do that. Whether you win through yelling or silence, ghosting, or showing up to a fight, talking to the person or talking about them so everyone else knows how wrong they are, we all have the same goal in mind, to win. With that in mind, we all have unavoidable arguments. What are we supposed to do? How can we get better at arguing? How do we win? Well, we're gonna look at a passage from the book of James, who was the brother of Jesus. What makes James so interesting is that he didn't grow up thinking that Jesus was the Son of God. He grew up thinking that Jesus was just his older brother. When Jesus left home and started teaching in the Judean countryside and traveling around with messages about what God was like, what did James do? He stayed away. It seems like James had zero interest in knowing what his older brother was up to or why. Honestly, I can't blame him. Can you imagine your older brother walking around acting like he was God? The point is, we can assume James responded in that way because they were siblings. That's why it's interesting to read what James had to say about conflict, tension, and convincing others that you're right. James writes this. James probably spent most of his life doing what most of us have done with our siblings, being quick to speak and slow to listen. From what we read in the Gospels, James wasn't super supportive of what Jesus was doing. That is until James realized he had been wrong about all of it. By listening, most likely to Jesus' friends and followers before, or even Jesus himself, James began to see something he didn't see before. His brother wasn't acting like God. He was God in a body. He was who he claimed to be. When James changed his mind about Jesus, he saw him for who he really was. It put everything else into perspective, including conflict. So James instructs us to listen first, whether you were right or whether you were wrong, whether you know the whole story or you don't care what it is, whether you have a great clapback ready or you just don't know. No matter the situation, the response should be the same. First, listen with the intent of learning instead of trying to change someone's mind. After we listen, James said that we should be slow to speak and slow to become angry. It doesn't mean that we should sit back and take whatever someone throws at us. It means we don't speak reactively. We pause. We take a breath. We compose our thoughts and our emotions before we respond. Slow to speak and slow to anger means we don't let our emotions determine our reactions. And when we speak, we do so purposefully and in a way that is honorable. We all know what it's like to be quick to speak and quick to become angry. Think back to middle school. What were things that you got so worked up about? Now think about this. Are those things important to you now? Do they even matter? I'm guessing not. I bet those arguments would even seem silly now. But you know what is important? The people you were arguing with. Here's what I'm getting at. We're right in the middle of a time when tensions are high and conflict is normal. In fact, conflict feels constant. Arguments aren't playing out in our homes, in our friendships, in our schools, and in our culture. And when conflict is everywhere, the temptation to ask, how do I win this argument and prove that I'm right, becomes more common. But maybe that's the wrong question. Maybe instead of asking, how do I win this argument, the question should be, how do I win this relationship? How can I talk about this in a way that if we don't agree, if we're never convinced that I'm right, that we can still be friends? Even if I'm never good with their opinion, is there a way that we can still be good? Not always, but if there is, that is the true win. It's about making the other person realize that their relationship with you matters more than their disagreement with you. So there you go. All your arguments are fixed. Easy, right? I'm just kidding. I know that exactly 0% of this is easy. Real talk, figuring out how to handle arguments or conflicts or disagreements has been one of the hardest parts of being a mature human being. Here are 3 things that will help. First, memorize this one verse. If we want to respond to arguments and conflicts differently, we need a new technique. So memorize this verse. Then, pause and pray. Nothing helps us to be slow to speak like stopping and praying for another person. When we pray for someone, it changes how we think about them. It helps us remember that they're human and who probably wants the same thing as we do, which brings me to the last thing. Empathize. Empathy is what happens when you put yourself in someone else's shoes. Whoever you disagree with usually has more to their story than you know. There's more to their opinion or beliefs, but it's hard to remember that if we don't pause and listen to their story before responding. Try challenging yourself to not respond until you've thought about it long enough that you can clearly state how they feel in a way that they would agree with. Usually, if you talk about the issue from their point of view, you can empathize even if you still disagree. We may not be able to change the way people behave when it comes to conflict, arguing, or fighting, but we can change how we behave in those situations.